Maya Thompson stood tall in a wood-paneled courtroom packed with onlookers. A seasoned civil rights attorney in her late 30s, Maya was sharp, composed, and widely respected for her relentless fight against racial injustice. On this particular day, she was representing Jamal Green, a 16-year-old black student wrongfully accused of assaulting a police officer during a school protest. Jamal had no prior history of violence, and cell phone footage revealed he was simply trying to protect a fellow student from being dragged by police. As Maya confidently delivered her argument, pointing out inconsistencies in the officer's statement and highlighting systemic bias in how black teens are treated, her voice echoed powerfully through the chamber. She was clear, respectful, and direct, never once stepping out of line. But her confidence seemed to rub the judge the wrong way. Sitting at the bench was Judge Ronald Greaves, a man well into his 60s with a reputation for being short-tempered, old-fashioned, and obsessed with courtroom decorum. He had served in this position for over 20 years and rarely tolerated what he saw as challenges to his authority. Greaves, who had been showing subtle signs of irritation during Maya's remarks, suddenly leaned forward with a cold glare. "You will stop right there, Miss Thompson," he barked. The courtroom fell silent. Maya blinked, taken aback, but remained calm. "Your Honor? You have consistently shown disrespect to this court with your tone, posture, and refusal to acknowledge the authority vested in this bench," he said sharply. "If you are unwilling to demonstrate proper humility, I will instruct you to kneel before this court as an apology and recognition of your place." Gasps broke out. The clerk froze. The jurors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Even the prosecution looked stunned. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Maya's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me, Your Honor?" she asked, her voice still even. "I said what I said," the judge replied coldly. "Kneel, now." The demand was more than demeaning, it was outrageous. A black woman being ordered to kneel in a courtroom by a white judge reeked of deep-rooted racism and historical echoes of oppression. It wasn't just unconstitutional. It was a public humiliation. "I will not," Maya said clearly, standing straighter. "I am an officer of the court, Your Honor. I will not kneel." The silence returned, heavier this time. Judge Greaves's face turned red. "Then I will hold you in contempt." And with that, he banged his gavel. Courtroom security inched forward, as if waiting for the judge's next order. Maya stood still, defiant but composed. Spectators began filming on their phones. The room buzzed with disbelief and outrage. Outside the courthouse, whispers of the incident had already begun to spread. One video clip hit social media within minutes. The caption read, "Judge orders black lawyer to kneel in court?" Within hours it went viral. Maya's stand, her refusal to be degraded, was about to ignite a firestorm. But for now, inside that courtroom, she stood alone. Not on her knees, but on principle. And nothing would ever be the same after that moment. The courtroom incident exploded across social media within hours. A short video clip, just under a minute long, showed Judge Ronald Greaves demanding that Maya Thompson kneel as a show of humility and Maya's calm but powerful refusal. The video went viral, gaining millions of views in less than a day. Hashtags like #StandWithMaya, #JudicialAbuse, and #KneelToNoone began trending on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. News networks picked up the story, with anchors expressing disbelief that a judge could issue such an order in a U.S. courtroom in the 21st century. Meanwhile, Maya spent the night in a holding cell for contempt of court. Her colleagues, civil rights groups, and supporters worked swiftly to get her released. Early the next morning, cameras flashed as she walked out of the courthouse steps, head high, flanked by her legal team. She didn't make a fiery speech, just a short, Clear statement. I will never kneel to injustice in or outside of a courtroom. That one sentence was enough to ignite a national conversation. Back inside the courthouse, Judge Greaves remained silent, refusing to comment to the press. Privately, however, he was fuming. He believed Maya had embarrassed him and violated the sanctity of his courtroom. His inner circle urged him to walk back the kneeling comment, call it a misunderstanding, and apologize. But he refused, doubling down instead. That same day, he made a brief appearance on a conservative local talk radio show where he implied that some people don't know their place anymore and that his authority had to be enforced. That quote, too, spread like wildfire, fueling outrage and disgust nationwide. As the backlash grew, Maya's law firm publicly declared its full support. Former clients, fellow attorneys, civil rights leaders, and politicians came forward praising Maya's integrity. Major civil rights organizations like the ACLU and NAACP condemned the judge's actions and announced plans to investigate his history on the bench. At home, Maya was still reeling from the emotional toll of it all. While she appeared composed in public, the weight of the moment pressed heavily on her. She received both support and hate online. Anonymous messages flooded her inbox, some encouraging, others laced with racism and threats. But Maya had been through this before. She leaned on her family, mentors, and longtime friend and fellow attorney Tasha, who reminded her that standing up for justice often meant standing alone at first. Meanwhile, protests erupted in the town square just blocks from the courthouse. Students, community members, and activists gathered with signs reading "Maya stood so we could too," and "Judges must be just." Local authorities tried to keep the protests peaceful, but tensions were growing. The courthouse, once seen as a symbol of law and order, now stood as a stage for a national reckoning on race, power, and dignity. Despite pressure from state officials, Judge Greaves refused to issue a public apology or recuse himself from Maya's case. His stubbornness only deepened the public's anger and drew attention to his long history of controlling courtroom behavior, especially toward black defendants and attorneys. For Maya, this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every person who had ever been silenced, humiliated, or stripped of their dignity in the name of order. And she was ready to fight not just for herself, but for them all. Maya Thompson wasted no time after her release. The moment she was free, she and her legal team got to work. Though still shaken, she was determined to transform the humiliation she faced in court into a larger battle for justice. Her team filed an official complaint with the state's Judicial Conduct Review Board, accusing Judge Ronald Greaves of violating not only court ethics, but also Maya's civil rights. The complaint included witness testimony, video evidence, and legal precedent, showing that no judge has the authority to order an attorney to kneel in court. The story had already spread nationwide, but now it gained a new layer, a formal legal war. Prominent civil rights attorneys offered pro bono support. Public interest law firms joined forces. Even major political figures weighed in, demanding an investigation into Judge Greaves' fitness to serve. Meanwhile, the media frenzy only grew. Louder, news channels replayed the viral clip on a loop. Morning shows interviewed Maya's former clients, who all spoke glowingly of her character and courage. A few brave attorneys who had once appeared in Greaves' courtroom began to speak out, too anonymously at first, describing his history of targeting women, particularly women of color, with condescending remarks and aggressive rulings. But Judge Greaves wasn't backing down. Instead of apologizing or stepping aside, he dug in deeper. In an official court statement, he claimed Maya's behavior had been aggressive and inappropriate and accused her of grandstanding for the cameras. He insisted that the kneeling order was symbolic, an invitation to restore courtroom decorum, and not meant to humiliate her. His defense backfired spectacularly. Maya's supporters, including countless legal professionals, called his response gaslighting. Protesters outside the courthouse held up signs reading, "Symbolic oppression is still oppression, and this is not 1865. Then came a pivotal moment. Maya received an offer behind closed doors. If she quietly dropped her complaint and agreed to a non-disclosure agreement, the contempt charge would be cleared from her record and Judge Greaves would issue a vague, face-saving apology. It was an easy way out, but Maya didn't take it. She knew the consequences of continuing would be intense. There would be more public scrutiny, possible retaliation, and deeper attacks on her reputation. But she also knew something else. This moment was bigger than her. Accepting silence would send a message that powerful people could humiliate and silence black professionals without consequence. That was something Maya refused to accept. As the legal battle intensified, Maya's team received a break. A mysterious former law clerk of Judge Greaves reached out, offering to share confidential files and testimony about the judge's behavior behind closed doors. According to the whistleblower, Greaves had a long track record of unethical conduct, most of which had been buried or quietly dismissed by the system. This revelation could be the turning point, but it also raised the stakes. Maya's fight wasn't just about clearing her name anymore. It was about bringing down a powerful man who had spent decades abusing his position. The courtroom war was no longer confined to four walls. It was now a national battle over dignity, justice, and the unchecked power of the bench. And Maya was becoming the face of a movement she never asked for, but was ready to lead. Just as Maya Thompson's legal battle was reaching a boiling point, an unexpected message appeared in her encrypted inbox. It was from someone claiming to be a former law clerk for Judge Ronald Greaves. The message was short but chilling. "There's a pattern. You weren't the first. I have proof." Intrigued and cautious, Maya's legal team set up a secure meeting. The whistleblower, a white woman in her 30s named Claire Mitchell, met them in a quiet downtown cafe. Claire had worked under Judge Greaves nearly a decade earlier, and what she revealed confirmed Maya's deepest suspicions. Greaves, she said, had a long pattern of discriminatory and demeaning behavior, especially toward black women who appeared in his courtroom. Claire explained that during her time as a clerk, she witnessed Judge Greaves berating black attorneys more often, cutting them off mid-argument and using his authority to humiliate them under the guise of courtroom discipline. He even referred to one black female lawyer as too emotional for legal work in a private meeting, an incident Claire had recorded in a personal journal. There were internal memos, unofficial complaints, and old transcripts, many buried deep within court records or dismissed before reaching formal hearings. Maya's team began digging. They uncovered old disciplinary records that had never seen the light of day, sealed or quietly dismissed. In one case, a black female public defender had accused Greaves of bias and verbal abuse. The complaint was withdrawn after the defender suddenly took a job in another state. Now Maya's team suspected intimidation had played a role. Armed with this new evidence, Maya and her allies decided it was time to go public. A press conference was scheduled. Maya stood before cameras flanked by civil rights leaders including members of the ACLU, NAACP, and prominent black attorneys who had flown in from across the country. Claire stood by her side, visibly nervous but determined. Together they exposed the pattern. Old transcripts were shown. Testimonies from other legal professionals, some anonymous, were read aloud. One quote echoed through the media, "Judge Greaves didn't just silence attorneys, he erased careers." The public response was immediate and massive. Protests swelled in cities across the country. Legal watchdog organizations launched independent investigations. News outlets began running investigative segments on Judge Greaves, digging into his entire career. At the same time, Maya's supporters created an online database called the Bench Watch, where attorneys could safely submit their experiences with biased judges anonymously. Stories poured in not just about Greaves, but others like him. A movement had begun. Judge Greaves, under immense pressure, issued a statement calling the allegations an orchestrated smear campaign by radical activists. But it was too late. His credibility was unraveling fast. Even some of his former allies on the bench began to distance themselves from him. Meanwhile, Maya was approached by several former victims who had once been too afraid to speak. One woman, a retired attorney now in her 60s, told Maya, "I never thought I'd live to see him held accountable." For Maya, this was no longer just a case. It had become a crusade against institutional rot, against a system that had protected men like Judge Greaves for too long. And the battle was far from over. The next stage would take place where it all began, in court. Only this time, Greaves would be the one on trial. After weeks of escalating public pressure, whistleblower revelations, and national outrage, the state's Judicial Oversight Committee officially announced a formal ethics hearing against Judge Ronald Greaves. The hearing would be open to the public, streamed live, and held in the very courthouse where Maya Thompson had once stood, ordered to kneel. But this time, the tables had turned. Maya would be the one testifying, and Greaves the one answering for his actions. The courtroom was packed. Cameras lined the back wall, and rows of spectators, legal scholars, law students, and activists filled the seats. A quiet tension buzzed in the air. Maya sat at the front with her legal team, dressed in a sharp navy suit, her posture composed but resolute. She knew the moment was bigger than herself. She was no longer just a victim seeking justice. She was a voice for every professional who had been silenced, dismissed, or humiliated by unchecked judicial authority. The proceedings began with a brief statement from the Oversight Committee, outlining the charges against Greaves: abuse of judicial power, racially motivated conduct, repeated ethical violations, and a pattern of discriminatory behavior. Then came witness after witness, attorneys, former clerks, and court staff, many of whom had never spoken publicly until now. Each told stories that mirrored Maya's experience. Attorneys berated in open court disproportionate contempt rulings, biased comments, and targeted discipline. Then it was Maya's turn. She stood before the committee and addressed them directly, without notes. Her voice was steady, passionate, and unwavering. "I was not held in contempt because I broke the law," she said. "I was held in contempt because I refused to be broken." She recounted the day in vivid detail from the moment she was ordered to kneel to the defiant refusal that made her a national figure. But more than that, she spoke about the invisible toll, the fear, the weight of centuries of systemic disrespect, and the emotional exhaustion of having to remain composed while being dehumanized. Her words were not angry, but they were undeniably powerful. "Judges are meant to uphold the law," she said, "not sit on a throne, and certainly not use that throne to crush the dignity of others." The room was silent when she finished. Even members of the committee appeared visibly moved. Then came Greaves' turn. Defiant as ever, he attempted to justify his actions. He claimed Maya had disrupted courtroom decorum and accused the media of twisting the story. But when asked about his past behavior and the mounting pattern of similar incidents, his answers became defensive and evasive. He even snapped at one committee member during questioning, further exposing his temper and arrogance. At one point, under pressure, he blurted, "I was simply trying to remind her who's in charge in that courtroom." That moment sealed his fate. By the end of the week, the committee voted unanimously. Judge Greaves was to be removed from the bench. Disbarred and referred for further investigation. The courtroom erupted in restrained applause. Maya didn't smile, she simply exhaled, the tension of weeks finally releasing. She had stood her ground, not just for herself, but for countless others. Justice had not only been served, it had been reclaimed. But even as Greaves fell, Maya knew the system wasn't fixed. This was just one battle. The war for equity and accountability was still ahead. The removal of Judge Ronald Greaves sent shockwaves throughout the legal world. For many, it was the first time they'd seen a sitting judge publicly held accountable for racial misconduct. The headlines declared it a landmark victory, not just for Maya Thompson, but for every voice that had ever been silenced in a courtroom. But for Maya, the end of Greaves' career wasn't the end of her mission. It was just the beginning of something much bigger. In the days following the ruling, Maya was flooded with messages. Some were from fellow lawyers, others from everyday citizens, all thanking her for standing tall when it mattered most. Many shared their own stories of mistreatment by judges, especially black women who had endured disrespect, intimidation, or condescension in professional spaces. Maya didn't let those stories go unheard. She began hosting virtual town halls, bringing together lawyers, judges, students, and policy advocates to discuss how to reform courtroom procedures and prevent judicial abuse. These gatherings led to a powerful initiative, the Dignity and Justice Coalition, a nationwide network dedicated to promoting fairness, transparency, and accountability in the legal system. Meanwhile, her original client, 16-year-old Jamal Green, the boy at the center of the case that started it all, was granted a new trial under a different judge. With the public now watching closely, the prosecution dropped most of the charges. Jamal was found not guilty, and for the first time in months, he walked free with his mother by his side, tears in her eyes and gratitude on her lips. Maya returned to the courtroom for Jamal's final hearing, not as a headline, but as his lawyer. When the judge dismissed the charges, Jamal hugged her tightly and whispered, "Thank you for fighting. Not just for me, but for all of us." That moment became symbolic. The image of Maya and Jamal embracing was shared across social media and featured in newspapers and magazines. It captured everything Maya had fought for: truth, dignity, and justice served without bias. As pressure mounted from the public, lawmakers took notice. A group of state senators introduced legislation inspired by Maya's case. The bill, unofficially dubbed Maya's Law, proposed mandatory racial bias training for judges, independent disciplinary review boards, and publicly accessible judicial conduct records. The law gained bipartisan support and sparked similar legislative efforts in other states. Despite the fame and media attention, Maya remained grounded. She declined book deals and reality TV offers, choosing instead to return to her firm, take on pro bono civil rights cases, and mentor young black attorneys. On the one-year anniversary of the kneeling incident, Maya stood once more on the courthouse steps. This time, she wasn't alone. Former clients, legal allies, students, and community members stood behind her. Cameras flashed again, but this time there was no controversy, only celebration. "I didn't choose to be the face of this movement," she said in her speech, "but I did choose not to kneel. And that choice, simple as it was, lit a flame we're going to keep burning." The crowd erupted in applause. Because in the end, Maya hadn't just stood her ground. She had helped shift the ground beneath the system itself.